Hello everybody, welcome to Art Smart. I'm going to show you a quick clip here.
My name is Gulliver, Your Majesty. Lemuel Gulliver, a shipwrecked sailor. At your service.
Well, welcome to Lilliput, Mr. Gulliver.
The clip that you just saw was from the film Gulliver's Travels. It was an animated film from 1939, which was released by the Fleischer Brothers. The Fleischer Brothers pioneered a technique called rotoscoping about 2 decades before, and they were using it heavily there. Rotoscoping is when you have a live-action actor that you film, and then you take paper and you put it over the film and you trace the live action actor, and it creates a very realistic looking person. It's somewhat impressive at first glance because the animation looks much more lifelike and true to our actual mannerisms than a lot of animation does, your traditional animation. But there is a problem. There is a major problem when it comes to having rotoscoped animation, because there's something just a little bit off. There's something that kind of makes us feel slightly uncomfortable when you see a rotoscoped person and then you see traditional animation. Why does it feel different, and why is it kind of awkward to have a rotoscoped character interact with a traditionally hand-drawn character? We're going to talk a little bit about that in this video. There are many forms of animation. There is very realistic, there's cartoony, there is modern animation, stylized, but for the sake of this video, we're going to talk about 2 different types today. We're going to talk about freehand animation, or animation that is done freely with the artist not tracing anything. And then there's rotoscoped animation, where there is a lot of tracing going on. I'm going to show you a couple of quick examples today. Now, I'm going to use this Beatles album that I have as a basis of something that I'm going to utilize as if I'm going to animate it. Let me show you something. So let's say I'm going to animate the Beatles crossing over Abbey Road here. Now, I could do it in the old-fashioned hand-drawn way, where I'm just kind of quickly making cartoony-looking drawings. And of course, this is going to be George Harrison kind of walking in the background here, in the back. And let's say I draw him kind of a cartoony way here as he's walking. And let's say I go along and I animate or draw in all the other characters for this scene. This is hand-drawn animation, or done freehand, where I am just freely drawing whatever I feel like, and maybe later on I go in and I clean it up. There is nothing that is guiding my hand or forcing me to follow reality. I'm freely drawing what I interpret as I'm looking at the original image. But if I'm going to rotoscope, what I'm going to do is I'm going to trace very carefully what I see. And I'm very carefully following the body and the outline of this particular person, and in this case it would be George Harrison. Now, this is a much more accurate drawing of the person, because I am following exactly what their body shape is. And if I took the time to really do a super detailed tracing, I could make this extremely convincing, just like the Gulliver's Travel thing that we saw at the beginning of this video. So it would seem on the surface that it would be beneficial to rotoscope all your animation, because it would be extremely lifelike and it would be easier because all you have to do is trace. You're not figuring things out by just kind of working it out on the piece of paper. But the problem is, when it comes to rotoscoped animation, is that you're never going to get it 100% correct to real life. There are so many things in our bodies, our faces, our movement, that it would take forever just for somebody to rotoscope all of our nuances. If you look at my face here, yes, there are major lines that you can easily see. The outlines of my eyes, the outlines of my cheeks, the outlines of my facial hair, but there's also texture on my face. There's light over here and darkness over here. Up on my forehead, it's much lighter over here and darker here in the middle where the light isn't hitting. There are all kinds of nuances to our body, and it would take forever for an animator to try and make it that lifelike. So what happens in rotoscoped animation is they approximate most of what they want to trace, but they leave certain things out. So our eye is always going to look at that animation and say, something's wrong, something's missing. It looks real, but it's kind of not. And we're slightly distracted when we look at that. So whenever we're looking at the drawing, we feel like it's realistic, and then something says no. Our brain is like, no, that's not quite realistic enough. There's a second problem with rotoscoping. That is, when you are doing something by freehand, it's usually very curvy and loose, kind of like my fast drawing here. But if you're rotoscoping, it's usually very stiff looking. There's lots of very simple lines and not a lot of these kind of curvy, loose lines that I did over here. And so when you're animating, most animators find that having lots of curves to the object or the person that they're drawing helps it to move easier on the screen because curvy lines seem to flow into each other. But lots of stiff lines kind of just look exactly like that. They're stiff. They don't seem to move very easily. So a lot of the time, animators have found that if you try to rotoscope, the animated drawing just looks kind of stiff, and it looks kind of lifeless on screen. Again, it's not quite like realistic movement. You're just animating those major areas that they have time to draw. And so the drawing ends up usually looking a little bit lifeless. So a lot of times animators will choose to hand draw their animation to make it feel looser and freer. Especially if you're in a fantasy environment, like a Disney film, where it's usually taking place in a fairy tale land, they choose to use curvy animation because then they can exaggerate when they want to. If the person is falling down a cliff or something, realistically that person could easily die. But in an animated cartoon where they can make the character squash and stretch, they are able to make it so the character can live. There are things that you can do with traditional hand-drawn animation that rotoscoped animation makes very difficult and unconvincing on the screen. So, in the end, it is very difficult for animators that want to have realistic-looking characters to have them look interesting on the screen. And so there's been a lot of films that have done well with this and other films that have not done so well. The films that usually do well with rotoscoped animation, let's say, for example, the Lord of the Rings films with Gollum, as you can see here, they have been able to be successful by having a character that looks real, but they slightly exaggerate the character and make its movements bigger and its body parts bigger in order to make it more expressive and interesting to look at. Gollum, obviously he's not a human character, but there's a lot of human type features, but they make his eyes bigger, they make his mouth bigger, they make his movements a little bit more over the top than what happens in reality with the actor, Mr. Serkis. I never say his name correctly. They exaggerate slightly to make it more interesting and less stiff looking on the screen. Other films, though, have had less success. This is a film from the early 2000s, Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within, where they tried to be very, very close to reality. And what happens is it's close, but not quite close enough. They don't quite get all the nuances of reality in there, and the characters just look creepy. And that happens a lot in films where they have that weirdness where our eye can see close to reality but not enough, and it says something is wrong. So if you're seeing a film and it's animated and it feels fine, but then all of a sudden it feels like something's wrong to your brain, it's probably because they rotoscoped and they didn't use exaggeration enough. If you're going to be an art smart person when you're watching films, you learn a little bit about how the film was made and understand why certain techniques are used and other techniques are not used, and maybe sometimes they should be. Hopefully this whole explanation makes you a little bit more art smart. Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.